My name is Jenna Bowmaster. I am a high school Spanish teacher. I received my bachelor's in Spanish teaching from Morningside College, and I'm currently working towards a master's of education at Morningside College as well. Today I'm presenting my research on the effects of response to intervention to academic achievement in secondary students. There has been a history of low academic success in secondary students. 66% of 8th grade students are not proficient in math and reading on the National Assessment of Education Progress, according to the nation's report card. They also have a history of poor performance on this NAEP exam, according to Wexler in 2018. The reading scores have not improved since 1998, and math scores have not improved since 2009. In 2018, there were 2.1 million students, that's 5.3% of students, who were high school dropouts, meaning that they did not have a high school degree, GED, or were currently attending school, and that's according to the National Center of Educational Statistics in 2020. And minority students are at an even higher, greater dropout risk. Those rates include 6.4 for Black students, 8.1 for Pacific Islander students, and 9.5% for American Indian and Alaskan Native students. This can have an impact on our students in the future. Students have become unprepared for the workforce, according to Rothman in 2012. In a survey of employers, they said that 39% of recent graduates lacked skills for entry-level jobs and 45% lacked skills for above entry-level work, and those skills include ability to problem solve and communicate. In 2015, only 31% of 12th graders were considered proficient in reading on that NAEP exam, and only 6 were considered advanced, and that can become problematic because according to WE in 2016, entry-level employees need to read text at least an 11th grade level, meaning that they may be entering the workforce unprepared. And it may also affect their college readiness. Only 46% of students who took the ACT in 2014 met the college readiness benchmark set forth by the College Board, according to the College Board in 2014. And 54% of students who met that benchmark complete bachelor's degree, compared to only 27% who did not. So meaning that college benchmark is really important for their future success. Traditionally, teachers have been using the banking model of education. That's when the teacher gives all the info and the students passively pick it up. And this model can hinder critical thinking and problem skills, according to Macedo in 2013. According to Alam in 2013 as well, teachers have teacher-centered classrooms, and it's hard for them to change from these traditional methods. But students feel higher anxiety and less motivation with this method that uses drills and memorization. That's according to Mahmoud in 2011. Response to intervention, often known as RTI, is a tiered system that was first used to identify special education students, according to Fisher and Frey in 2011. These different tiers of RTI are explained by Johnson and Smith in 2011. Tier 1 uses high-quality instruction that's for the entire class research-based practices. Tier 2 creates an intervention for low-achieving or at-risk students, and Tier 3 is usually an intense intervention set aside for special education students. Even though research is just beginning to emerge in RTA in secondary schools, there has been some studies out there. One is Fisher and Frey in 2011. 444 students in grades 9 through 12 had RTA implemented in their classroom. Their teachers used research-based practices, competency-based assessments, and they scheduled interventions. And after that, the schools increased reading proficiency 11% on English language arts and math, and also improved their GPAs from 2.89 to 3.36. RT has also been implemented and studied in the middle school. In a study by Johnson and Smith in 2011, they implemented RTI for 6 years in junior high. The reading proficiency in that school rose from 77 to 81%, although math and reading did stay the same. Also, fewer students were retained in previous years from 23 to 19. In a constructivist classroom, students are influenced by their previous knowledge, according to Amine and Assel in 2015. Now, in RTI, those tiers are structured around what students already know, building on that constructivist theory. Also, in a constructivist classroom, students have to be actively engaged. So teachers in RTI have to adapt instruction to engage students in these tiers. We cannot just do that banking model of education anymore. And also in constructivism, teachers must know what students already know to guide instruction, meaning they need assessment. In many RTI studies, teachers use multiple assessments to create these personalized interventions. So why is this research important here? There's only been a small number of researchers that have studied RTI with secondary students, according to Bach and Cosby in 2019. And most of this research that has been on RTI has been in elementary school students, according to Fisher and Frey in 2011. They also state that RTI is beginning to be implemented in K-12 schools as a new practice. And for my school, we have begun using RTI across all subjects. So I chose to research this topic so I can potentially use RTI to help my students learn. There is a lack of research for RTI in older students, leaving a gap in that research. The purpose of this study, though, is to analyze the academic effectiveness of RTI for secondary students by compiling current research that's focused on that academic achievement with RTI. I am predicting that RTI does increase academic achievement for students in a variety of settings and subjects. This is a review study that compared and synthesized quantitative and mixed methods research, although the majority of the research was focused on that quantitative data. I reviewed 8 articles trying to answer this research question. Based on previous research, does RTI increase academic achievement in students in grades 6 through 12? The articles I reviewed needed to be reliable and valid. So to do that, I analyzed this research with the rubric for evaluating print and internet resources by Mills and Gay in 2019. This rubric evaluates the research using 5 different criteria: relevancy, author, source, methodology, and date. I'll tell you a little bit about those now. For a research to be relevant, a subject must be closely related to my topic. The problem and research questions would be similar. I did use these following research terms that you can take a look at to find relevant information. The author of the research must be experienced in the field, has some previous published research in this same field, and given enough information that the reader could contact them. The source only came from peer-reviewed journals, and they had to be scholarly journals as well. The sources that I found were from Morningside College's online library and Google Scholar as well. Within the library, there are several databases that were found to find the previous resource. The methodology of each research had to have a strong method section. It had to have enough information to could be replicated and be free of opinions and biases. And also the date had to be published later than 2010, making it a current and relevant research paper. And to find those, I used the search filter that only allowed those dates from 2010 to 2020 to make sure this data was relevant and valid. After analyzing each article for the reliability and validity, I completed a thematic review of previous research, and I created a literature matrix using Google Sheets. Within that, I saw some differences and similarities emerging, including the types of interventions, the intervention size, the population of the students, and what those academic outcomes were. In the end, I reviewed 6 quantitative studies and 2 mixed methods studies. This literature matrix helped organize data by the type of research, the demographics, the length of the studies, and which tiers of RTI did they implement. And that Data is summarized here in Table 1. You can pause and look through that closer if you would like. So the demographics of the previous research varied. There were 5 middle schools and 3 high schools, and the 5 studied suburban, 2 urban, 1 rural, and a large-scale study had all of those in there. The demographics range from 17 participants to 1,867 participants. Now I'm going to talk about the academic achievement using multiple tiers of intervention. For Johnson and Smith, they used tiers 1 and 2, and afterwards they saw an increase in writing proficiency from 77 to 81%. There was no change in proficiency in reading and math. And there were fewer discipline referrals and fewer students who were failing at least one class after implementing RTI. Buck and colleagues in 2019 compared Tier 1 and Tier 2 math students, and while they both increased their academic achievement in math, there was not a significant difference between those who received Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction. Vaughn and Fletcher in 2012 actually used all 3 tiers. Tier 1 and 2 showed gains in reading after these interventions, but the intense intervention did not show significant gains. Fisher and Frey used Tier 1 and 2 instruction. They saw a 4% increase on state testing scores and increased their GPAs from 2.89 to an overall 3.36 GPA. Now, other researchers just studied 1 tier of intervention. Burke and colleagues in 2017 used a Tier 1 writing instruction and compared tests from the pretest. And actually, all but 1 of those students became proficient in writing. Bach and Cosby were another group who did a Tier 1 intervention, a Tier 2 intervention. Their average growth rate on the Algebra Basic Skills Test was 0.62, but the range of growth was negative 0.56 to 211, showing that not every student actually benefited from this intervention. Flagelli, Luby, and Wardle in 2011 studied Tier 2 intervention in reading using story structure, their typical practice with the direct instruction, and sustained silent reading. Actually, all of these helped increase academic achievement, but story structure and the typical practice had the greatest effect. Bemboom and McMaster in 2013 studied Tier 2 interventions using the Mace selection reading scores. The teacher-led intervention had a moderate effect compared to those without, but the peer-led actually had a large effect compared to those students who did not receive an intervention at all. So this small group instruction in constructivism was proven to be effective in these studies. Students were also building on previous knowledge on those Tier 1 and Tier 2 after receiving 1 tier and going to the 2nd tier. And many of these studies also used multiple assessments, so teachers knew what students knew, another element of constructivism. Here you can see the comparisons of the long and short-term interventions. I saw that there was plenty of similarities between the long-term and the short-term interventions. The long-term interventions usually had more than 1 subject. They had a variety of large and small group instruction, and students were able to receive both the Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions. And what happened with these long-term is 3 out of 4 of them had overall improvements, but we couldn't see the individual performance, which may be a limitation to those researches. The short-term interventions were 1 subject. They used either large or small group rather than both, and they only received 1 tier of intervention, rather that be Tier 1 or Tier 2. But the benefit of these are we're able to see the individual breakdown of academic achievement by the singular students rather than an overall analysis. Finally, the limitations to this study. Throughout high schools and middle schools, RTI programs vary greatly, and according to Bach and Cosby in 2019. So the variation in studies can be a limitation. Like this, different studies use different forms of assessment. Maybe one did writing, one did math, and then the sample size is varied as well. So in conclusion, RTI does increase academic achievement in secondary students, but it does not increase it in every student, in every subject. So that should be taken into consideration. And the suggestions for future research include continuing to study this academic achievement with older students in RTI. Another thing that may be considered in the future is how to study and actually implementing RTI, because there are a lot of different considerations than elementary school, according to Bach and her colleagues in 2019. So the difficulty and the challenges may need future research. So how can this affect the students, teachers, and schools in today's districts? RTI can improve across many subjects, we can see from the previous research. It may meet the needs of many students, Ben Boom and McMaster found out in 2013. And school and student success has increased after using RTI, according to Fisher and Frey in 2011. So what other things schools should consider are RTIs did not close the achievement gap between those proficient and those struggling students in the research by Bach and colleagues in 2019. They also warned to be careful not to track students into one tier. That is, if a student is in tier 1, they couldn't move to tier 3 or to 1 as necessary for their learning. So that is something to be careful of in instruction. Finally, implementing takes time and resources, so continuing that research and considering what you may need for a school to implement RTI. Here I have the references I have used today. Please feel free to stop and take a look at these. And thank you for your time.